When we think of ancient Greece, a few things probably pop into your head. Philosophy, amazing theater, and of course, its most famous invention, democracy. But this revolutionary idea didn't just appear out of thin air. The real story is honestly way more complex and, frankly, a lot more interesting.
So that brings us to the central question, and it's a big one. How on earth did this collection of small, fiercely independent, and constantly fighting city-states, the polis, end up giving birth to a system of government that we're still talking about thousands of years later? It really is one of history's great puzzles.
And like any good puzzle, the solution isn't obvious. To figure this out, we need to piece together three clues that seem totally disconnected. A huge ancient graveyard in Sicily, a new and misunderstood type of political strongman, and a complete revolution in how wars were fought.
So let's start with our first clue. It takes us into the world of archaeology, where old bones can tell some incredible stories. We're heading to a Greek colony called Himera to find it.
Okay, so Himera was founded way back in 648 BCE over in Sicily, and it is an absolute goldmine for archaeologists. Why? Well, because after it was destroyed, nobody ever rebuilt on top of it. It was just abandoned. This left its cemeteries perfectly preserved, giving us this incredible untouched snapshot of life and death in the Greek world.
Himera is pretty much a perfect laboratory. Its cemetery is untouched, with over 13,000 graves, one of the biggest samples we have from this entire period. We can date it precisely. And get this, young children were often buried in large pots, which sounds a little strange, but it means their fragile remains were preserved, giving us a rare window into child mortality, something that's usually lost to time.
So, scientists went to work, carefully analyzing the bones of nearly 3,000 individuals from this site. And what did they find? Well, the answer was a total shock. It completely turned what experts thought they knew on its head.
Take a look at this. It tells a really surprising story. Now, life was still incredibly tough by our standards, don't get me wrong, but the data showed that for kids and young people in Himera, life was a lot less deadly than anyone expected. The numbers pointed to a life expectancy closer to 30 years old, not the grim 20 years that historians had always assumed was the norm. The bottom line, way more kids were actually surviving into adulthood.
And that changes everything. It created what historians call a demographic push. All these surviving young people meant the population was growing and they needed somewhere to go. This sparked an incredible wave of colonization. Between the 9th and 3rd centuries BCE, Greeks founded over 500 colonies, just like Himera, all across the Mediterranean. This was a world on the move, absolutely buzzing with new energy.
Okay, on to our second clue. This population boom was happening at the exact same time as a massive economic expansion, and all this new wealth gave rise to a totally new kind of leader.
The great historian Thucydides saw this connection firsthand. He wrote that as the Greek cities got more powerful and more focused on making money, a new political figure started popping up all over the place. The tyrant.
But wait, we have to hit pause on our modern definition of tyrant. In archaic Greece, the word didn't automatically mean some evil, cruel dictator. It just meant an autocrat, a leader who seized power, usually from the nobility, and provided strong, decisive leadership. You should think of them less as monsters and more as pro-growth strongmen.
And these guys, they had a playbook. It usually started in coastal cities, right where the action was for sea trade. This created a huge split between the old money landowning families and the new money commercial types. A charismatic strongman would step into that chaos, exploit the division, and grab power. And once they were in charge, they'd push all these pro-growth policies, building bigger ports, creating standard weights and measures, and in doing so, they opened up a path to wealth for a whole new group of people outside the traditional elite.
So, we've got a population boom and an economic revolution. Now it's time for our final clue, and this one comes from the battlefield, where another radical change was underway.
Warfare was totally transformed. The old way of fighting, the kind you read about in Homer's Iliad, was all about individual heroes. These elite aristocrats looking for personal glory in one-on-one duels. But the new style, hoplite warfare, was the complete opposite. It was all about a tightly packed formation of citizen farmers, the phalanx, fighting as one cohesive unit, not for themselves, but for the survival of their city.
The key piece of tech here was a new kind of shield with a double grip, and it perfectly illustrates this new mindset. The shield was designed so that half of it protected you and the other half protected the guy standing next to you. It was heavy, it was awkward, and it only worked if everybody held the line together.
Think about that.
This was a revolutionary social idea being played out on the battlefield. Your life literally depended on the courage and discipline of your neighbor. The group, the phalanx, was suddenly way more important than any single hero.
And here's where it gets political. This military revolution created a brand new empowered middle class. These regular farmers were now the backbone of the city's defense. They were essential. And because they were essential, they could start demanding a say in how things were run. And who did they often support at first? Those pro-growth tyrants who could help them break the political stranglehold of the old aristocratic families.
Okay, we've got our 3 clues on the table: a population explosion, the rise of business-friendly tyrants, and a new army of citizen soldiers. Now, let's put this puzzle together.
If you look at this timeline, you can see these things weren't happening one after the other. They were all overlapping, crashing into each other, creating a perfect storm during Greece's archaic period. You've got colonization taking off, the hoplite phalanx empowering a new class, and the tyrants shaking things up. And then, look closely at the end of the timeline. The very first democratic reforms start appearing in the exact same cities that had just been ruled by those tyrants.
This is what some historians call a critical juncture. See, democracy wasn't just born from one great idea or one brilliant person. It was the unpredictable outcome of all these powerful forces coming together at the same time: more people, new money, and a new way of fighting. And that leads us to the most powerful and, honestly, mind-bending conclusion of all. Tyranny, the very thing we think of as the opposite of democracy, wasn't its enemy. It was actually a temporary and maybe even necessary bridge to get there. The tyrants were the ones who shattered the old system, and in doing so, they created the space for something completely new to grow in its place.
So, what's the big takeaway here? Why does this ancient story matter to us today? What can it tell us about how profound political change actually happens?
It tells us that history almost never moves in a straight line. The path to democracy wasn't some neat, orderly philosophical debate. It was a messy, complicated, unpredictable process, driven by deep, powerful forces simmering beneath the surface. Things like population shifts, economic change, and new technology. Those forces are what created the conditions for a radical new idea to finally take root and change the world.